Regine, my muse in the shadows, in my journals, in my writings. She is everywhere, a silent presence felt but never seen. Our relationship crafted the most intricate existence any author in Denmark has known. I was the old man's noble wisdom, and she the woman's lovable lack of understanding. My lifelong task has been to become myself, to find the idea for which I am willing to live and die. And in Regine, I glimpsed another idea, a life surrendered to the immediacy of love. She was the epitome of innocence. Her childlike enthusiasm a stark contrast to the pervasive melancholy that enshrouded my childhood home. Our household was steeped in dread, making Christianity seem the most inhuman sort of cruelty. My father's frightful melancholia seeping into every corner of my life. He deeply ingrained in me the poisonous connection between sexuality and sin. Regine was my liberation. She captivated me with her youthful exuberance. I was drawn to and intimidated by her strength of character and unwavering faith in me. I began approaching her, strategically lending her books, subtly directing her attention to specific passages. It wasn't long before we were engaged. At that time, the world was a bright canvas of endless possibilities. Yet even amidst this newfound joy, a shadow lingered, the awareness that I was not suited for marriage. I was already religiously engaged to God. I felt torn between the earthly and the eternal, between the allure of domestic bliss and the solitary call of my vocation. I was overwhelmed by the vehemence of her love, a passion that threatened to consume my creativity and divert me from my true path. I knew with dreadful certainty that I could not be both her husband and myself. I could not serve two masters. I was bound not to Regine, but to something higher, an engagement not of love, but of spirit. So began the time of terror, my necessary cruelty. I transformed myself into the villain, distancing myself from Regine, becoming cold and withdrawn, a parody of my former self. I exaggerated my flaws, my melancholic temperament, my religious anxieties, using them to drive her away. I read her a sermon from Minster every week, trying to dampen her romantic enthusiasm with displays of piety and seriousness, only to discover that it intensified her passion. I gifted her a copy of the New Testament after a disagreement in which she had been too forward. I reasoned that if she believed I was the villain, she would be free to hate me and move on with her life, preserving her honor and youthful optimism. An act of exquisite gallantry and exquisite cruelty. It was a terrible game, but eventually the strategy worked, though not without inflicting deep wounds on both of us. The broken engagement became fodder for Copenhagen's gossip mill. My motives questioned and character judged, but I endured the condemnations, for I knew that in my suffering I was also transforming personal experience into art, and so Regine became my muse, her presence a silent echo reverberating through my works. Repetition, fear and trembling, stages on life's way, all informed by the ghost of our shared past. The character of Cordelia in The Seducer's Diary embodies her beauty, innocence, and capacity for passionate love. In Repetition, I explored the possibility of regaining a lost love through a spiritual and intellectual process. I struggled to make sense of our broken promise, transmuting it into metaphors, searching for meaning in the ruins of what might have been. There were chance encounters at church, stolen glances across crowded rooms, but she was married to another now, and I remained convinced that any reconciliation required her husband's consent, a consent that would never be given. Driven by a mixture of guilt and a lingering desire for closure, I wrote Regine a sealed letter, pouring out my heart, seeking forgiveness, offering a form of reconciliation. But the letter, entrusted to her husband, was never delivered. He deemed it an intrusion, and so, even in this final attempt, I was denied the peace I so desperately craved. In the end, I made her my sole inheritor, a posthumous gesture that transcended the boundaries of our earthly separation, an atonement for the harm I had done, and an acknowledgement of the profound impact she had on my life and work. I considered our engagement as sacred and enduring as a marriage. She was, in fact, the unnamed person to whom I dedicated my entire authorial activity. Ultimately, she refused the inheritance, keeping only a few letters and several mementos of our time together. But nothing could change the fact that she was my muse, my torment, and my redemption. She was the thorn in my flesh, whose pain guided me down an extraordinary path. In loving her, I had to lose her, and in losing her, I gained everything. Myself, my writing, my suffering, which in turn became my salvation.